Let us help you reach your peak in retirement. It's time for Retirement Elevated with Sean Lee.
Hey everybody, welcome into this week's edition of the podcast. This is Retirement Elevated with Sean Lee and myself, talking investing, finance, and retirement. This go around, we're going to talk about the guessing game. And Sean, most people when trying to plan their retirement guess about several things they probably really shouldn't be guessing at. So we're going to try to eliminate some of those. But first, how you doing? You doing okay?
I'm doing great, man. It's pretty cold right now, but I'm looking out and seeing what's going on in Major League Baseball, and it's that time of year where teams have started, so it's a good time.
Which makes you happy, right?
Yeah, I can start to watch games that don't matter.
That's one way of looking at it. Well, very good. Well, listen, let's talk about today's topic. We'll jump in and just get to rolling a little bit here. So, as I mentioned, a lot of times people just whether it's, I don't know, fear of the unknown or whatever keeps them from finding out, but they end up just guessing at things in retirement. Really, you could find these answers out pretty easily, and it's nowhere near as painful sometimes, I think, as people think it's going to be. It's kind of like going to the dentist, I think. Sometimes they think you're automatically going to be told you have to have a root canal, and often that's not the case, right? There's just like, oh, you just need a little cleaning or something like that. And so when it comes to financial planning, people will think, oh, I'm going to be told I'm never going to be able to retire, or I'm this, that, or the other. And so they don't find out, and that just puts you in worse shape. So let's just go through a couple items here, like monthly income, for example. Why on earth would you want to guess at this versus finding out? Yeah, you could easily put together a quick little thing and say, well, this is how much I'm making and this is how much I'm spending. But that's going to change through retirement. And are you finding that out correctly? People often shortchange themselves on this. They think about the big ticket items and not all the little things that makes up their monthly income and outgoing.
This starts at the 401k level or the retirement, provider level.
Okay.
Because people get into their retirement, their login through Fidelity or Schwab or wherever it may be, and it tells them they've always got that little calculator, and that little calculator is only based off of what they have inside of that retirement account, right? So I've got $500,000 in my retirement account, and Fidelity tells me I can pull out $2,600 a month or whatever it may be. Right. And that's a slippery slope, because that's in a lot of cases that's really scary, because you think, oh my gosh, I've saved this much money, I've worked hard to save it, and I can only get this much out. When we start to look at real planning and getting into a situation to where you can confidently retire and confidently move from working, it starts with your expenses. It starts with saying, all right, this is what I need each and every month to live on. And a lot of people will say, well, I make $80,000 a year, that's how much I need. Well, not really, because there's taxes, probably 401k contributions and things like that. So when we look at the income need, what steps do we take to determine how much income we really need? And I tell people, do it two ways. One way is just write down your budget. Figure it out. Okay.
But it's the B word, Sean. I don't like the B word.
I know. I have to budget. I have to write down what my mortgage is, and I have to write down what my utilities are and how much I spend on food. But I'll leave some of that entertainment stuff out, because that's not really in my budget.
Right.
So then you write down the budget. You get a good handle on what you have to spend each month to live, and then confirm it with your bank statements. So go back and have budget number 2, which is 12 months of bank statements. And the reason that I say that is the budget that we write down in a lot of cases is 30% less than the actual budget that we're spending. From a planning perspective, if I'm building a plan, I need real data. I can't build a plan that's got to be increased by 30% down the road because we just didn't take the time to do it. I know that's the hardest part, spending time, figuring out what you're spending, but it will make your plan that much stronger. And I just don't want to throw out an arbitrary number. Oh, I need $10,000 a month.
Right.
Where did that come from?
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah, we tend to do that. And I get it. And like I said, I was, kind of being facetious there with the I don't want to budget, but a lot of people do that. They hear that word and they go, that means I'm going to be restricted. No, it just means you have to have a general understanding of what's coming in and what's going out so that you don't have to guess at it. It's like the 4% rule. People will say, well, that's just a good average. So if I've got $1 million, I can pour 4% out, which is, $40,000 a year. Well, do the math. How long is that going to last, right? Depending on what you're making, and that's not taking into account if the market has any stumbles and that $1 million drops down to $700,000, or even if it's in a 401k, you're thinking you got $1 million, but you're forgetting about Uncle Sam, right? There's just a number of little variables in there. So you don't have $1 million. You got 700,000, let's say, roughly ballparking it. So just a lot of ways you can underestimate that monthly income need. And why guess when you can find out by having a good plan put together, by running the numbers, stress testing it, and seeing what you need to do. And of course, you can do that when you're working with an advisor. Another place, Sean, you might stumble or guess is, the major purchases, if you will, or the emergency fund. Because Murphy and his stupid law does not stop at retirement, right? We joke all the time that when we get to retirement, things are going to be better, and hopefully they are. We're going to be able to relax and enjoy ourselves, but life is still life, right? Something's going to happen, pandemic, roof flies off, whatever, And so you've got to think about that emergency fund, or how are you going to pay for some of these larger ticket items? Have you planned for any large ticket items that might happen?
Well, and this actually hits home for me. I've got a 6th grade daughter and a 3rd grade son. We've talked a lot about them, and
right.
And right now we have a lot of expense. I mean, our kids they go to a Catholic school. They play competitive sports, baseball, soccer for my son. My daughter does cheer. And so we have a lot of outgoing expenses on a monthly basis that allow for my kids to have these experiences and hopefully provide them the best opportunity to put themselves in position to have a good future.
Right.
But then it's like, oh, well, we only have to pay for my daughter for 6 more years. But then you forget, oh, by the way, she's probably going to get married at some point. Maybe, maybe not. I hope she does.
Right.
She's probably going to go to college.
Right.
Inherently, she's going to ask me for some money to help her with something.
Sure.
And then we've got a son right behind it. And that doesn't just include like all the other stuff that comes, You live in a house long enough, you got to replace the water heaters, the roofs. If you're like me, I like cars. I like to have a different car. I've stopped doing that because I don't owe anything on cars, so it's nice to have payments.
It's nice when you don't have that payment, right? But then you see something shiny and you're like, oh.
Yeah, it's like, oh, wow, I think I'd like that.
Right, right. And that doesn't change in retirement either, right? People want to, you might want a new car in retirement.
A new car, new golf cart. Maybe you want to do that country club that you've never done, or maybe you just want to travel at that point. It's, hey, I want $20,000 a year to travel, and so those major purchases are part of life. But it comes back to the budgeting side. Like, all right, here's what I need to live on. Here's my lifestyle, but then here's the other stuff that I would like to have. And if the plan fits, I think we've talked about this book, Die With Zero, that I read, which is about spending your money to live your maximum life without running out of money, right? And it's doing the things that you want to do. And far too often we find people that have saved their entire life and stay in that mode in retirement and just can't bring themselves to spend, where, we know that you're going to have to do some of these things. You can't take it with you. You can't.
Right.
The benefit of giving money to your beneficiaries after you're gone is minimal to you. It's zero. But you've created opportunity for them. And so when we start to look at big expenses, let's incorporate big expenses into the plan now to see if the plan will actually work. And if the plan works while doing those things while you're alive, why not do them so you can experience all of the joy and all of the benefits that those assets will bring to you?
Great points. And so again, life doesn't stop just when we get to retirement. If anything, it opens up even more, at least hopefully, that's the idea anyway, for a while as we're enjoying ourselves and doing all the things we wanted to do when we got done working. So got to bear in mind, that income need, those major purchases, that emergency fund, so on and so forth. And then you got to bear in mind, Sean, and again, we're talking about the guessing game, so not guessing. And these last two I've got, maybe someone could argue, okay, you kind of got to guess a little bit because we don't control this. But do you or can you plan for it? So inflation, our old pal inflation. How do you go about, planning for something that's fluid? Well, do you just err on the side of caution by going a little higher than inflation? What's some things to think about there?
Well, it depends on what sort of inflation you're looking at, right? Healthcare inflation is different than normal cost of living.
Well, we'll get to that in a second because that's on my list too, yeah.
But so if you look at the last 100 years, inflation was around 3.2.
Okay.
If you look at the last 10 years, inflation is less than 2. So there's a couple of ways that you could look at it. You could say, well, based on recent history, inflation is going to be around 2%. Well, could it be? Sure. We've got interest rate environment that's at its lowest point in history at 0. We're starting to see rumblings that the Fed could increase interest rates, or they'll allow for a little bit of inflation. So could we see 2? Sure, maybe. But could we see 3?
Yeah,
sure.
Right.
I mean, and the way that I look at inflation is just like anything else. I hear a lot of people tell me, Sean, I'm not living to be 100. Well, what if you do?
You might.
Right. What if you're healthy?
Yeah.
You're 74 years old. We've got a family that we work with. They're still running. He runs marathons. He's 74. It's
wow.
like,
yeah.
all right, well, you're pretty healthy, man.
Yeah.
Like, plan on it. And the worst case scenario is if you don't make it to 100, well,
you're just leaving more behind to the heirs or whatever.
Yeah, your plan was successful. So when we look at inflation, I tend to lean towards kind of a 3% rate.
So kind of err on the side of being a little higher then, sounds like. Yeah.
Plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Yeah. Well, people get lost sometimes in the fact that, if you go back to, topic 1 here, guessing on the income, but let's say you figure it out and it's, $5,000 a month for easy math. Well, in 22 years, based on inflation, that's $10,000 a month now that you now have to spend for the same amount of living. And most people, I imagine, Sean, don't call you up and say, hey, can I go backwards in my lifestyle in retirement, right? So you got to plan for that. So it's going to double, in about 20 years. So factoring that in, of course, COLAs, cost of living adjustments, they're not really, if you have a pension, most of the time they're flat. They don't have them. And let's be honest, Social Security COLA usually gets wiped out. When it happens, it gets wiped out by Medicare adjustments anyway. So bear that in mind. Go ahead.
And I look at vehicles. I was just talking about cars.
Right.
I have a Yukon. I looked at...
do they make those still?
Oh, man, they're sweet. The new body style.
Oh, really?
But I was like, oh, man, the new shiny object, the new body style came out. I should probably look and see.
And it's probably way more than the one you bought,
Oh yeah,
5 years ago.
$13,000 more than what I paid 3 years ago for my Yukon.
Yeah.
In just 3 years, $13,000 more.
Wow. Yeah.
I think I can drive my 3-year-old one for for a while.
Not that big a deal, right? I mean, I always joke and just call it the Snicker bar effect, right? I used to love to get a Snickers bar going, on my way into high school, something years ago, 70 years ago, and it was like, I don't know, I think it was less than 50 cents. It was like 35 cents or something like that, and it was big. It was a big one. Now it's like $1.35, and it's smaller. So.
Go to the movie theater, man.
Oh well, yeah. When they're open, right?
COVID was the best thing to happen to me. I don't have to go to movies anymore. I can rent them right at home.
For a family of 4, I bet you were dropping $100. Between popcorn, movie tickets, all that kind of stuff. Sodas, whatever.
And it was a movie that I'd fall asleep in because it was like Disney, Pixar, or something.
Right? Yeah. It's expensive. Well, you mentioned it, and I mentioned it as well. Healthcare costs. Now, maybe, again, you could give somebody the leeway of saying, you got to guess at this because it's out of our control and it's constantly changing. But, I mean, most people aren't even having the conversation about dealing with healthcare costs, let alone just guessing at it. But there's still ways you can be planning for this, especially considering, to your point, that it's typically higher than regular inflation.
Yeah, I mean, healthcare inflation, from what I've seen on average, is around 5%. And give or take, depending on the type of healthcare need, and that's kind of the increases of long-term care. But that's one of those moving targets. Is again, I don't know what sort of health you're going to be in 5 years. I don't know what sort of health you're going to be in 20 years. I know that our that the environment that we're in right now, you can see premium payments of $800 to $1,200 a month, depending on the type of policy that you get.
Right.
And as you get into Medicare, obviously the things change, but healthcare is one of those other kind of moving targets where I don't know if long-term care will happen to you, but if it does, this is what you need to look out for.
Yeah.
And Genworth did a great study, and their average cost of care is about $80,000 a year in a long-term care facility, and national averages. If you live life expectancy in a facility, that's 2.7 years, so call it $250,000. My job isn't to tell people that, you need to go out and buy long-term care, you need to go out and buy this, you need to buy this policy. It's just take the time, go through what you actually have going on inside of your plan, and is your plan strong enough to account for those expenses? If it is, great, you've got your answer. You don't need insurances. If it's not, great. You've got your answer. You need to figure out a solution.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's why you don't guess, right? So you've got your answer, and now you can start to figure out a solution. And that's really the whole point in just, not doing the ostrich thing, not just kind of turning a blind eye to your point. Well, I won't need long-term care. Well, 2 out of 3, 7 out of 10, right now the statistics are what they are going to need some sort of long-term care event. So, don't guess at these things. Don't guess at your money, especially when the answers are pretty easy, to come about. Now, maybe us as lay folks, we don't think that they're that easy because it seems complex, but that's why you turn to an advisor. That's why we do the show. That's why we do the podcast, is to share some information and also say, hey, listen, if you need some help, ask. It's okay. Not a big deal to reach out and ask somebody for some help, and it's usually a much, much easier process than people think it's going to be. So do yourself a favor, do your retirement a favor, reach out to Sean if you're not already working with him at 855-50-RETIRE. Him and his team at Elevated Retirement Group are here to help you. 855-50-RETIRE, or share the podcast with someone who you know might benefit it. If you haven't subscribed, you can find all of the information at retirementelevatedpodcast.com. That's retirementelevatedpodcast.com. And Sean, I think is a pretty easy, simple topic to talk about this week. Don't guess if you don't have to, right?
That's exactly it. Clarity and understanding provides comfortability in your life. So
there you go.
Take the time.
That's exactly. Take the time. It doesn't take that long either. That's the other thing. So it doesn't take a lot of effort to get this done. A little bit. And I'm saying it doesn't take no effort, but it takes a little bit. But still, it's not as complex or complicated often as people think it is. So reach out to Sean, folks. We're going to wrap it up this week. Thanks so much for your time. Don't forget to hit subscribe on Apple or Google or Spotify or whatever platform you use. And again, you can find it all at retirementelevatedpodcast.com. Sean, I'll see you next time, my friend. Stay warm, okay?
Hey, thanks, man. We'll talk to you soon.
And stay away from those shiny Yukons, too. So,
yeah, I'm not buying anything anytime soon.
There you go. We'll see you next time here on the podcast, folks. This has been Retirement Elevated with Sean Lee from Elevated Retirement Group.
Investment advisory services offered through Elevated Capital Advisors, LLC, and SEC Registered Investment Advisor.